What if I told you that there's a game that everyone knows of, it has an active daily player base, and it's still getting weekly updates? What do you think that game is? RuneScape 3 is like the ugly older brother to old school RuneScape. He may not get any girls approaching him, but he's out there grinding, working on himself. This doesn't mean that the game is bad, and I wanna make the case for why RuneScape 3 is criminally underrated. But as a veteran player, I am painfully aware of its flaws, and especially the things that keep new players from joining the game. So let's look at the past and the present, to see where RuneScape lies in this MMO landscape. If you're just looking for a side monitor game you can play while doing something else, like playing another game or watching a movie, this game is perfect for you. It has so much AFK content and all kinds of different varieties of it. They've really focused on that over the years and it shows. But unfortunately that is not as interesting to me. I want to look into the more active parts of the experience, mostly combat and questing. Currently, RuneScape 3 has one of the most unique and skill-based combat systems around. It uses an ability-based system popularized by World of Warcraft, where different abilities have different effects. If you use an ability, it puts it on a cooldown, but there is also a global cooldown of 1.8 seconds between your abilities. On top of that, there's a tick system. Every global cooldown is 3 tick, and I have a whole other video about ticks, so you can understand them if you wish to do so. They add complexity on top of this global cooldown system. You are not tied to a role or a class, but there are different combat styles you can use, and switching between them is as easy as switching your weapon. You can even bring multiple gear sets of different combat styles to a fight if you have the inventory space to do so. But doing this can limit your healing, as it competes with the inventory slots available to the player, and it's always capped at 28. A key defensive mechanic in the game is switching between the right prayer. And players also have access to Soul Split, which heals them for the damage that they do. So experienced PvMers can use Soul Split and Protective players respectively when they're getting hit and doing damage. And these defensive choices make for an interesting planning phase before the fight even starts, because the players can choose to bring more food or more tools that they can use during the fight to do damage. For example, if you're maging a fight, you can bring a lot of food, but if you choose to bring melee alongside mage, then you're bringing a lot less food. And the choices aren't limited to just food. There's also gear options, defensive options, different weapons, different special attacks you can bring, and all of this affects how you approach the fight you're going into. This planning phase can be expanded even further to go into specific ability rotations, where you can plan out the start of the fight to skip a mechanic or an entire fight. And for every boss you can find a rotation that's been made by a very talented player already, so you don't have to start from scratch. Even when starting out the game you can look at these rotations and learn from them, but it is very important to learn the basics as well. So just looking at rotations might not give you the best results because you don't understand what's going on underneath. But if you're paying attention and trying to understand what's happening, you will improve at a rapid rate. There are currently 4 combat styles in the game, and every new player should probably start out with Necromancy. It has its issues, but it gives the best performance for the least amount of knowledge in the game. And the only thing I ask if you start out with Necromancy is that you don't limit yourself to it, because every other combat style has vastly better damage potential, but the issue is that the burden of knowledge and the skill needed to put out that damage is much higher. I've already made a whole rant about how I don't think Necromancy is all that great, and you can find it linked down below. That's mostly all what the player can do, but also while doing all of this you need to focus on what the boss is doing. Recently they've been adding really complicated and fun to do bosses. Especially Amascut is a great example of mechanical boss fight that still needs damage to be done, and is extremely fun to fight. Unfortunately, due to my health, I haven't been able to access the boss as much as I would like to. It even had a world's first race, a first time in RuneScape 3. And honestly, a shout out to Amascut. In this stream, he really put out energy and did a good job.
Team is getting absolutely obliterated. We've got something from the statue as well. Oh, and it's gone through a player, but doing some great work.
Seems like they kind of know what they're doing.
They are successfully charging it up. They've done one successful charge, and now let's figure out what's coming next. I guess Death's Office is what's coming next.
Keeping the audience and the rotating developers interested in the world's first race. And I think this bigger focus on combat is really making the game a better place to come into. The only issue is that how you get into combat is so difficult, but we'll get into that later. Amascut is kind of an outlier and a new focus in combat where you can't just brute force through phases by skipping all the mechanics. The mechanics come after the damage phase, so it's strictly segmented in that sense. You do mechanics, you do damage, sometimes you do a bit of both, but it's clearly meant to have damage phases and mechanical phases, which is really cool. But unfortunately, this is kind of the exception, not the norm. It's a return to form for Jagex, who'd had a big drought in group content, as player base always kind of whines for soloable things, that they don't want to do things together in an MMO, and I've never understood this concept. Why I play this game is for the community and to PvM with friends, and this group content hate never made sense to me. And now that Amascut is super popular, it shows that people didn't know actually what they wanted. They didn't want solo content, and this is a wider issue in RuneScape, I think, that's been happening for years. They've released bosses that are meant to be group content and then made them soloable, and then the solo version has been basically an easier or a more efficient version of the fight, discouraging people from grouping up. This design direction was so weird to me because Solak and AOD, the kind of premier group bosses before Amascut, were so fun to do in groups. Why did they not keep on that path? Okay, I kind of lied to you. There's a couple mechanics you can skip at Amascut during the DPS phases if you do enough damage. And that's fine. That's always been a part of RuneScape. But in some of the bosses, the damage gets ridiculous when you know what you're doing. And a great example of this is Warcat. Warcat was the first big boss release after Necromancy's release, and it was meant to do a lot of damage to the player because Necromancy brought in so much innate tankiness. But crucially, they also made a Slayer monster, which makes a lot of different damage buff apply to him. And also, it is a dragon, which makes even more of the damage buffs apply to him. And on top of that, you don't actually have to kill him, you just have to kill his summoner. And this makes a lot of different buffs apply together, giving the player like a 50% damage increase on top of their normal damage rotations, which leads to some absurd damage raises against this boss, as he will kill you really fast, but if you bring the proper DPS setup, you can also kill him really fast. What I'm using here is a damage rotation made by Evil Lucario, one of the best players in the game. And it's not a 100% consistent rotation, you still need to adapt if things go wrong, or if damage ranges don't hit and stuff like that. So you still need some mastery of the boss. But this shows how easily, when given enough tools, the players can skip entire fights. I personally never thought that this Slayer buff monster thing was a good idea. I feel like the damage in these kind of games should be more truncated and should be kept in check without too many stacking multipliers, because you can get to some ridiculous extremes when you start stacking them. And a great example of this is IDPS's solo Taraket one-tick kill, where he basically stacks a billion multipliers on top of one ability and just one-shots him. It's honestly really cool tech, but for consistent fights, I don't think this is the way the game should be going. Like in every long-running game, power creep is eventually gonna show up its ugly head. And that's no different in RuneScape. A lot of the older bosses are beaten extremely fast or with ridiculous methods. But I think the Warcat example is crazy because it's such a recent boss fight. And it's supposed to take like, I don't know, 3-4 minutes with normal methods, and current fastest kill is like 1 minute. And this sort of power creep taking over old content isn't really a big problem for me if new interesting content comes to replace it. But the new content mostly has been solo content, and then group content has just been left behind for a while. But they're finally changing course, and I absolutely adore that. I might come off as more negative about these things because I've been playing this game for over a decade. But it's not all doom and gloom, because there's still a lot of fun to be had in this game. Even a lot of the solo content can be fun for a while. Once you get to this point where you can start farming bosses, I think this game is at its best, but the issue is the journey to get there. It's not an easy one. The big issue here lies in the time commitment that you have to do to get to the bosses. You have to skill for hundreds of hours to get everything done. And you also have to do over 100 quests to get all the rewards you need for PvM. Because they've locked in so many buffs for combat behind these skills and quests. And they are absolutely necessary, otherwise you're trolling yourself and your team. Questing in this game can be daunting, because it's not like a one big storyline you follow. You hop around between different storylines because they are accessible at different levels at the game. And then when you're doing another one, you kind of forget what happened before. On top of that, the older quests are so complicated and their objectives are so poorly communicated that you have to have the wiki page open for the quest the entire time. So this just becomes an alt-tab simulator, or you have your other screen with the wiki at all times just following a check-by-check guide. And at least for me, this makes me not appreciate the story at all. All of the lore, all of the story completely over my head. The only story and lore tidbits I've gotten are mostly from the elite dungeons that are like boss fight dungeons where there's some lore attached to them. And the developers are so heavily trying to incentivize you to do these quests that they give new quests always some powerful rewards for combat. And this makes this a nightmare for new players, because they have to do all of the old ones and the new ones, making it an insane time sink. And of course, to access these quests, you need to have different skill levels. And training skills in this game can be boring. It's mostly just AFKing. Of course, some quests give lamps for XP, which is great. But unfortunately, that is not the only thing you need skills for, because they've added multiple different skills that are helpful with combat, that have high requirement for the boost that they give, and not playing with this boost is literally trolling. So you have to get them basically before you even start combat. And this makes getting into combat a huge time commitment before you have any fun. You're basically playing this game for like, I don't know, 1,000 hours before you even get to the fun part. And honestly, how could I ever recommend that to any of my friends? I would say the big skills you need are archaeology, invention, and herblore. Herblore you need to have at 100, archaeology you need to have at least 99, but 113 would be great. And invention you need to have like at 90, but invention's problem isn't about the skill itself. The skill can be trained while doing combat, which is fine. The issue is that to get invention open you need 80 smithing, crafting and divination, and this is a huge time commitment in it itself. And nowadays, necromancy is recommended for most new players. Even necromancy has a skilling component that you can't skip as a PvM player. You literally have to do it. You can skip the combat parts of necromancy, but you can't skip the skilling parts. Like, how does that make any sense? But it didn't used to be this way. When I came back to RuneScape back in like 2014, the only skill you realistically needed for combat was herblore. And a lot of the more powerful quest rewards hadn't been released yet. Combat was a lot simpler and none of the power creep had really crept in yet. But also there were problems. There weren't that many bosses, a lot of the good group encounters hadn't been released yet, apart from Warago. But getting into this game at that point was a lot easier than nowadays, because I could catch up with the power creep a lot faster. And doing these releases as they came out was great for the flow of the game, as getting more rewards was always fun. And all of these killing updates and power creep updates to the game from questing were good. Invention is brilliant, it recontextualizes old items and gives them a new purpose. Archaeology is one of the most beloved skills in the game, but the issue with that is it takes such a long time to get through it. But it is a great skill on its own. It adds a lot of lore and mysteries to the game that you can explore. And none of these are bad things in isolation, but added to the new player's baggage of things he has to do before he can get to combat, all of this gets insane. And honestly, these systems are so entangled in here that I have no idea where to even start. I feel like a good starting point would be removing invention from the skill requirement of the other skills. I don't think that's necessary at all for the enjoyment of the game. Another great thing you could do is making the level requirements for the PvM boost to be lower. And I know a lot of people who have grinded this are gonna get mad, but honestly, does it really matter that you did something the hard way when a new player comes in? I would love to see all the quest rewards go, Just remove all the quest rewards and add maybe a low level boss or a practice boss like the Rat King in Old School or something like that with some rewards for lower level players. Say the Ring of Vigor passive. Why is that in a late game quest? It's one of the most powerful PvM rewards in the game, and it's tied to a questline that takes forever to do. And combat has to be the core of every modern MMO. That's how it's always been. And I just feel like Jagex doesn't have enough confidence in their own combat system to make it so. They have to have all this filler content doing absolutely nothing, instead of making new bosses for lower level players that could level them up from the beginning to make a more steady curve into learning the combat system. Because currently the combat curve is you AFK combat, you AFK skills, you do some quests, and then you have tier 90 necromancy eventually, and now you can do anything in the game because you have enough power. There is no gradual progression in the combat anymore. You can just take tier 90 necro, go to Raziel, do Raziel, have tier 95 necro, go do some AOD if you get a team, and now you have Bracelet Codex, do a bit of Amascut or Sanctum, and boom, you're a top geared necromancer. And this grind to get all the best installed gear for necromancy is so much shorter than the grind that you had to do to even unlock the tier 90 necromancy that it's ridiculous. To further hammer my point down on this, there is a great 300-hour playtime review of RuneScape 3 from Just Drive Hayes. And his review, from skilling perspective and questing perspective, is amazing. He does a really good job. But when it comes to combat, he has such a deep misunderstanding of the combat system because of how different it is from early game to end game that he completely mischaracterizes it, which is insane. He did a 300-hour review of the game and he can be so wildly wrong, and I can't blame him for this because the game didn't give him the opportunity to actually learn it.
Traditional MMOs have the tank, DPS and healer holy trinity, sometimes with a support role. RuneScape does not have this. Everyone tanks, everyone does damage, and everyone is responsible for healing themselves. Indeed, you can't heal others to any worthwhile degree.
Except you can heal others with the heal others spell, which use your own health to heal, and this is used sometimes in combination with barricade, which makes you take no damage to heal others freely. And this can also be used in combination with intercept, which makes you take all the damage your friend would be receiving. And this is one of the cool mechanics you can use to cheese some boss mechanics with the tools available to the players.
So if you're in a group killing bosses, instead of fitting into a trinity, you instead focus on which type of damage you are bringing.
Unfortunately, this is not true, since most boss encounters you can do damage with any weapon, and your damage style won't affect the boss fight that much. But what is important is your mechanical roles, what different mechanics you will be doing as a player in the boss fight.
You may remember RuneScape having the famous combat triangle, melee, mage, and range, like rock, paper, scissors. That's sort of still true, but it's also augmented because in 2023, RuneScape got a brand new combat style, the minion summoning, health sapping, necromancy skill, which made the combat triangle not into a square, but more of a pyramid with necromancy at the top above everything else because it's just so damn good.
Unfortunately, none of this statement is true. The combat triangle doesn't really matter in the game at all anymore. There are some minute instances from older content, like Dagannoth Kings, and maybe Rex Matriarchs for newer content where it kinda matters, but most of the combat triangle is entirely dead and it doesn't matter at all. Also, necromancy being the best combat style is a gross misunderstanding of the combat system. Yes, for new players, necromancy will be the best style to use, because it is the easiest style to get into. But when you get better at the game, every other style will trump it. And especially when you start hybriding, necromancy will be completely left in the dust with damage potential.
Style is stab, the damage is 48, and the speed is 4 ticks.
Unfortunately, none of these stats matter. The only stat in here that matters is the tier of the weapon. The weapon speed with ticks is kind of misleading because it's only affected to auto attacks. So if you need to use auto attacks, then the weapon speed might matter, but that is so niche, completely irrelevant in most cases. And the damage of the weapon is misleading because two-handed weapons will have a higher damage number than dual-wield weapons, but the actual damage output will be the same. I don't remember if they actually fixed this later, They might have in the latest combat beta fixed the damage numbers, I am not 100% sure.
Melee combat just needs the weapon, or weapons, because the evolution of combat brought with it offhand versions of weapons. Just be aware, in order to wield an offhand weapon, it must be the specific offhand version of that weapon. Range combat needs both the weapon and ammo, with both of them having an impact on total accuracy. And magic combat needs a magic weapon and some runes to cast spells. While in combat, you build up adrenaline, either by auto-attacking, which generates about 2% per hit, or using builder abilities, which generate 8%. You can see the adrenaline bar here. You then spend adrenaline on powerful abilities.
Adrenaline management is one of the most important things in the game, and you have a lot of tools to help you manage your adrenaline. The most common way is to keep up a crit buff at all times. Every style apart from necromancy has an ultimate ability that gives them a crit buff that lets every crit you do give you adrenaline, and this can be used in combination with greater ricochet or greater concentrated blast to give the player a lot of adrenaline on top of all the normal crits you would be getting. On top of this, you have access to Limitless that helps you cast thresholds and adrenaline potions to help you build adrenaline faster. A normal cycle of combat would be starting out with an ultimate ability that boosts your damage like Berserk, Death's Witness or Tsunami, and then doing a damage rotation under crit buff, and then cycling through this. With bringing in hybrid, you can use 2 different ultimates from 2 styles without them ever being on cooldown.
So at level 1 we have Slaughter. This is a threshold ability, meaning you need at least 50% adrenaline to activate it, and doing so drains 15% of the adrenaline bar. This inflicts a bleed effect on the enemy, doing around 35% of weapon damage every 2 ticks for a total of 5 hits. If the target moves while bleeding, they take 3 times as much.
Yes, bleeds are an ability type in RuneScape, but the issue with bleeds is that they don't stack between players. So if multiple players use the same bleed, the damage will be only calculated from the player who used it last. And this is kind of problematic for weapon special attacks that hit really hard with the bleed. Like, let's say, the new tier 95 1 spec that is a huge hitting bleed that only one person at the team can use at a time.
The final type of ability is called an ultimate. These need 100% of the adrenaline bar and drain all of it for massive damage.
Since in here he hasn't really gotten the idea of ultimates yet, since he doesn't have access to Suck Cape or the damage boosting ultimates, he doesn't understand they're more used for utility than them, and then the ultimates that are used for damage like Omnipower and Overpower are discounted by Suck Cape's buff. So this means that you will never be using 100% of your adrenaline for damage. Even when using them for utility, you're at most using 90%.
Now, the issue with abilities in regards to range and mage combat is abilities don't need ammunition to work. So a ranger will have to have arrows equipped, and they will use arrows for the few auto attacks they do, but they won't use them for abilities. Likewise, a mage will use runes for auto casting whatever basic spell they have selected, but their abilities, like Dragon Breath, don't need runes. They're essentially free. And seeing as abilities are your main source of combat damage, this means rangers and mages don't use resources up as fast as they used to. This can lead to a bit of a graphical disconnect.
I think this design choice of new players using less ammunition is great, because if they were to use ammunition at a high rate, then the price of the ammunition would go up, and that wouldn't be great for newer players. And on top of this, when you get to endgame combat, range and mage are mostly about keeping buffs up by stacking buffs with spells or arrows, and these buffs, when they're consumed and when they're built up, consume the arrows or the runes. So you are actively using the ammunition that you're given. But in the early game, it's balanced in a way where these arrows and runes are not a thing. And new players can have a cheap experience training these combat skills. And I think this is absolutely great.
So what if you want to just click and wait, like RuneScape used to be, but you also want the abilities to still happen? Well, with the Revolution combat system, you can do exactly that, and you don't need to remember anything. You drag the ability to the hotbar, line them all up, then get into combat, and let Revolution take over. It works like this. The game looks at the ability on the far left of your hotbar and uses it. If it can't use it because it's on cooldown or you've not got the adrenaline required, it moves on to the next ability and tries to use that one. It does this all the way along. So stick your ultimates on the left, some thresholds in the middle, and the builders on the right, and then just click, and the game cycles your abilities for you, and combat looks visually impressive with very little input. The skill here is setting up your bar before combat happens. And you can still manually activate abilities on the bar using buttons, that's fine. There are of course issues with this, such as how it's introduced badly and becomes a crutch new players rely on, and never actually learn how abilities work in isolation, but now we know how combat broadly works,
And he's absolutely right. Revolution is, to me, more of a skilling mechanic to get your levels up or to AFK something. It's not really a tool used for combat in the terms of bossing or active combat that I would like to do. Some people use a lighter version of Revolution to activate their basic abilities while doing bossing, and I think that's okay. I personally don't like it. I prefer the control that full manual gives me, but I can see why some people would only want to focus on using the ultimates and the thresholds. And this bit of the video wasn't to take down Josh Strifehaze. I think he's an awesome content creator, but this is to more show that RuneScape doesn't give you the tools early enough to start understanding the combat system in a level where you can shift from this skilling based gameplay into the bossing based gameplay easily. And I think that's a huge issue. In old school they've made huge strides to try and bring mid-level players or like low to mid-level players to combat with like Royal Titans and Moons and stuff like that, where the combat is already engaging in their base system. But in RuneScape 3 there is nothing like that. You just gonna have to do the skilling grind, and then when you're done with that, you can hop into combat without actually knowing anything about it. And to further cascade on this issue, the early game bosses that are in RuneScape 3 that you could be using to get into combat are completely obsolete. So doing the questing and the skilling grind is a lot better way to actually get into combat power-wise. And it makes no sense. Like, how are these mid-level bosses so useless gear-wise? And this disconnect with the sort of combat progression path, that you don't really have a go and grind this boss for this weapon and then do this and gradually power up your character. This means that there is no pathway for the players to understand what boss to learn next, what sort of mechanics I could get into, what could be fun with my skill level. But thankfully, the RuneScape community is awesome, and they have solved all of these issues by themselves despite the problems in the game. And something for everyone who wants to get into bossing should go into is the PVM Encyclopedia Discord. You can find tons of information about there, from abilities to boss progression to boss guides to anything. And you can literally ask people there, oh, what should I do here? And there's a ton of people willing to help. And this extends to clans and to boss communities. For every group boss, there's a community you can join. And you can find a clan in the game easily with people who want to do stuff together or just to talk in game. And really, I really want to end this video on a positive note because I love this game. But it's so hard because I can see the potential in bringing people into this endgame bossing loop. It is the bread and butter of the game. All of the other stuff I see as side attractions to the real meat of the game. And hear me out, Jagex, I have some suggestions that you might like. A lot of MMOs nowadays have boosters for characters where you can boost to level 60 or 70 or 80. I don't know what World of Warcraft is in now. But getting a character booster where you can skip all of those things that you would need to enter PVM would be awesome. Another option would be to add some mid-game bosses that gave good reward that would gradually boost your account up to the level where it needs to be for the bigger encounters. And this would include the skilling XP. I don't know what to do with quests, man. Just let us skip quests. But boosting skilling XP from a boss encounter would be pretty cool. Maybe make it like a half skilling boss where the mechanical things are skilling things and the damage things are damage things. I don't know if people would like that, but that could be something you could try. I just would love to get RuneScape to a point where I can recommend it to my friends without caveats. Oh, you have to AFK for 1,000 hours before the game actually starts. I don't want to say that. I want to say, yeah, start the game. Yeah, just do a little bit of skilling and a little bit of combat training, and then you can start getting into the easier bosses. And from there you can progress naturally. This video got a lot longer than I initially wanted it to be, but I think all the information here is crucial to the point I'm trying to make. That RuneScape 3 has a good system underneath, but you just have to get there. And getting there is the hard part. And I would love them to make the journey to the destination faster and easier for players. Because who really wants to play a tutorial for like 1,000 hours? Anyways, if you liked the video, click that like button, whatever. Subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Let me know something, I don't know. See ya.